Okay, it's going to be commentary for chapter 53 of my book Metadimensional, which you can find on Kindle, listen to for free as an audiobook. Links are in the description. Chapter 53 is called Statistical Shackles. Now, so if you're thinking about, consider the notion of randomness, physical randomness, or randomness in nature, or something that you cannot estimate with anything other than probability. So in a physicalist world, where you think that the world out there exists, and it's producing your experience. This is the physicalist world. This is what you believe, even if you don't know that this is what you believe. Of course, physical world is a broad definition. You can say that, let's say, transcendent world that has its own laws of nature, transcendent nature, produce your experience. It's the same thing. It's like it doesn't really change the causality. Your experience being created by something that isn't itself. So in that world, when you're seeing randomness, you have two ways of understanding it. One is as epistemic randomness, meaning it's not really random, it's just you don't have the capacity to track all the things that happen. And had you known all the details, all to the quarks, to the subatomic subatomic particles and energies and everything, if you had all this information, there would be no randomness. That's one option. And the other option is to accept it as some kind of a force of nature which you cannot explain, just like you cannot explain why is there something out of instead of nothing, and you don't ask that question anymore. Just say it's there. Like, for example, if you're thinking about, let's say, the half-life of an isotope, that's that every X amount of time, half of the amount of that isotope decomposes to a different element isotope. That's not something that you can track. There is no assumption that if you had known enough information, you would have known whether this or that particle would decompose and not the other. It simply doesn't. The information simply doesn't exist. That's how we perceive it. And if you're thinking about physical randomness in the sense of location of a particle in a specific time, the equations are showing that you cannot be precise about both at the same time. So this is the kind of randomness that just you're supposed not to ask the question. Then you have the other randomness again, that where you just don't know. So every time you approach randomness, no matter what's your approach, what will you do? You can give up and say anything can happen. I just not going to try to do anything in the world. I'm just going to accept that randomness can change everything, and not going to make a single plan. No one does that. Instead, what you do is you use naturally, instinctively, you use intuition. But under the hood, you could say that driving these intuitions are statistics. Like, I've seen this before, and therefore this should not happen again. For example, this should happen again. Like, for example, in the case of the composition of isotope particles, then we've seen it before, so we know it happens. But the same also applies to you're seeing trends in society. You've seen this before, so there's a high likelihood of, let's say, 90% that this will happen again. Say, if you see some kind of social unrest, there's 90% it will show in the news. So, and you think of it as just describing this thing that is either undescribable, there's nothing driving it, or you just don't have sufficient information. But it's there in the world. Now, this all flips if you assume the theory. If you assume the theory, then there is no world out there, and the randomness that you perceive, that's not something that is created by that world. That is created by the experiential agents that share that wakeful reality. Because there is no world. And if it comes from something, it comes from them. And what this randomness in their shared reality represents is a degree of freedom. It is the thing that makes it possible for experiential agents to make choices while not breaching the laws of nature that bind them. So in the case of in the isotope particles, physical randomness, then this is the minimal amount of, well, at least it's not sufficient, but it's at least part of the minimum amount of the freedom that you have physically to make choices. The same would apply to physical randomness, the location of a particle, and blah blah. This is the minimal amount of, not minimal, this is below the minimal, but this is like necessary degrees of freedom for there to be an ability for an experiential agent to make a choice without breaching their shared reality. But that's not all the places where you use like probabilities and statistics. I mean, it could have been, but it's not. Instead, like, we're using statistics basically for anything that we don't have a theory for. If you have like a problem that you don't know if it's like you have a situation and you want to try to estimate, is it going to be 70% that it will happen or not 30% that it won't happen? Same with medicine. You think that there's let's say 60% that the drug would work, 40% that it won't. Let's say 30% that it will do nothing, 10% it will do something bad, and you make a choice based on that. Now, what are you basically doing by making these statistics? You are saying, I'm going to live in a reality where I'm going to ignore the low percentage probabilities. I'm going to assume that the high percentage probability will happen. And if someone wants to take that low percentage probability, they can. But they won't be a part of the consensus. Now, sometimes the consensus is it will allow these outliers, and sometimes the consensus is strong enough, then those outliers will not even be considered. And what happens then, by applying statistics on things that are not like the physical randomness, things that you just can't change because they are like, if you're going to change it for you have to change it also for animals, and you have to change it for amoebas and everything that has maybe an experiential component to it and makes choices, you would have to apply it to it too. But when you're talking about humans, and when you can talk about semantics, then the limitations of statistics can be much greater. You can make it like, it's insane for some, like I'm giving an example, it's insane for someone to, I don't know, go to the office naked and expecting a raise. Of course, that's a stupid thing to do. But what I'm saying is that is possible. That is a degree of freedom, but that degree of freedom is being casted out by you saying the likelihood of that giving producing good outcome is next to zero. That's an option you have, but you don't take it. Of course, that's a ridiculous option. But you can make their options less and less ridiculous and still limit your options, what you're going to do. And this also applies to whatever degrees of freedom you have that are not registered, that you're not even aware of, specifically the private blind gap, what I've talked about in previous chapters. So what happens is, the more we apply statistics, the more we lock ourselves into our previous habits and our previous assumptions. And we lock reality into that. And if we have a reality that is suffering, as I postulated in the previous chapter, suffering from lack of experiential dominance, then the more we use our statistics, the more we make it harder for us to circumvent that. We're not creating laws of nature that we can say, okay, this is like, we're just changing reality to something that has a new law that we can explore. Statistics don't produce new ideas, usually. What statistics do is just simplify the reality that you perceive into one where only the most plausible options are even noticeable. And in a reality, again, that suffers from lack of experiential dominance, that suffers from over rationalization and analysis, well, it just sends it further down into what could be catastrophe.